We take stock after 7 rounds. Whose stocks have risen and whose have dropped? The Lions are in the gun. Can they still make finals? Plus the Hawks suffer their heaviest loss of the season. We put them under the microscope. This is Access All Areas thanks to Crypto.com. We've got a massive show ahead. It's great to have your company on this Monday. Damian Barrett and Matthew Lloyd join me as always. Welcome to you both, gents. All right, we're going to start things a little differently today. 7 rounds done. I want to just sort of take stock of where we're at in the season. I'm going to go first and show you boys what's what. We have to acknowledge that Geelong is probably the team that has impressed the most, obviously unbeaten, and Lloydie and I both got that wrong, so Damo, well done. The team that's underachieved, I know everyone's going to say the Brisbane Lions, just to be different, it's the Adelaide Crows for mine after being so close to making finals last year. They're 2-5. Sam Durham has been amazing in the midfield, just excelling for the Bombers at the moment. Signed a 4-year contract extension. He's dating Melbourne model Paris Bishop. So life is going really well. And Caleb Daniels, probably the obvious one for me in terms of stocks have fallen. Damo, you're next.
Yeah, I agree with you with Sam Durham. In fact, you took him off me. I've gone for Zach Guthrie in that particular space when it comes to players whose stocks have risen. But when it comes to the team that's most disappointing to me, it is the Brisbane Lions. And yes, that is obvious, but to be 2-5 at this point of the year, I'm not yet going to absolutely write them off from a finals perspective, but I think we can put a line through a premiership perspective. The reason I've got Essendon as the team that has impressed most, that loss to Port Adelaide 4 weeks ago was disastrous, but they responded with wins against the Bulldogs and Adelaide, and then I think their best performance of the year was a draw against Collingwood. Love how Zach Guthrie has continued to elevate himself, particularly in the most recent absence of Tom Stewart.
Yeah, the Cats for me have been phenomenal, and they shouldn't surprise us, but they do. I didn't think they'd make the final, so I have to name them like you, Nat, and say that they're the team that's impressed me. With Brisbane, there's something not quite right at that club. Some of their efforts after half-time were appalling against the GWS Giants. They couldn't see out the game against Carlton in round 1. And then they've had other games where they've just not been there. Isaac Heaney, I questioned him in the final last year. I put it on the agenda and said, this guy just does not stand up in big games.
Well,
I put it out there, he hurt, and now look at him, he's the best player in the game. And just want to show some statistics on 2 guys, Marshall and Fogarty, who will go up against each other in Thursday night in a showdown. They've been around long enough, but they just don't do enough. So I think Darcy Fogarty, I don't know, does he not work hard enough? Does he not get to enough contests? I think that is the case. And Todd Marshall, you don't want to be described as a nice player, but I think that's what he did. He looks okay when he's got the ball, but another player who just does not quite do enough.
Well, let's talk about Geelong because they're still unbeaten after defeating Carlton 7-0. You go back to 2022, they win a flag. 2023, they finished 12th, missed the finals. Lloydie, the rejuvenation of this list has been quite incredible.
It has been, and they get pluck players from obscurity, and they also get them late in the draft. But I think Nigel Lappin deserves a lot of credit. I think he's the best development coach there is in the game. And look at some of the improvements in some players this year, which takes pressure off. Like Tommy Hawkins hasn't had a great year. I think they've lost Tom Stewart a few times. Dangerfield's been out with hamstrings. But look at the improvement of Holmes, Bruin, Myers, Stengel, Bowes. Cameron's the superstar, and then Zach Guthrie, who you just named.
Every name on that list has all stepped up, including the established superstar of Jeremy Cameron. Lord, they still won 10 matches last year. Now, I know people thought that might have been the sign that the end had come from a premiership perspective, but they never got going. That they didn't get pre-seasons into their key players, and yet they still managed a double-figure digit amount of wins in the season itself. So, look, they've just regrouped. They've got games into it. And Jeremy Cameron, if he hasn't been the best player in the comp for 4 years, he absolutely is right now. And he's just playing with a licence that no one else has got right now. He's still playing as a key forward, and yet he's roaming up the ground, working his own game into the Geelong system. And that's the non-negotiable. You have to play the Geelong system, but he's playing the flair part of it perfectly.
How do you defend that, Lloydie?
Well, yes, I'm sure clubs are going to have to go to work on it because I've been talking about it for weeks. That normally if a player pushes up that high, you could just sit like a Steve May, for example, this week behind the ball, but it's not work because he's got such a high work rate and they don't pack the ball out and they run it in waves with handball. It's really troubling teams. But I want to give credit to them as a club. The way they keep the engagement, the way they put trust in players. what a club Jeremy Cameron went to, don't they? They're all so happy.
And to that end, you've got a guy who's the reigning All-Australian, or 2 years ago the All-Australian captain in Tom Hawkins, prepared to play 3 matches in a row now without kicking a goal, and yet being happy about that being the case because of the wins that come with the role that he's playing, allowing Cameron to do it. And Ollie Henry alongside him has been a huge acquisition. Yeah,
well, we have a couple of mouth-watering games that are coming our way this weekend. Geelong-Melbourne, as you mentioned, Lloydie, on Saturday night at the MCG is going to be an absolute cracker. But can the D's forward line score enough against this Geelong side? And we saw a different look to their forward line too last week.
Yeah, we did, and that's a concern for me. Like, are they going to stick with Turner? Like, Turner was sensational, but that was his first goal in league footy. He'd been a defender, so he's become a forward. So Van Ryan's not quite working. Ben Brown gets tried, dropped, back tried. So I just wonder. McDonald
up and back,
and
Petty a bit the same.
Petty's the same, but there's nothing really apart from Bailey Fritsch. There's nothing you look down there and go, okay, we know that's going to be.
They've got to go with Turner now, though.
Yeah, they have to. And but Pickett's huge. You know, they need Pickett firing. Petrarca even went forward. But this is going to be a great test for Melbourne, and whether they can be any threat this year, how they cope against this well-drilled Geelong side.
So on to Carlton now, because their loss to Geelong was their second for the season. So they're 5-2. They had their chances against the Cats. They had 21 more inside 50s. They won the contested possession count and had more clearances. Coach Michael Voss, rightly so, disappointed after the game.
I don't want us to settle that it was a good effort or it was close. It was unacceptable, and we've got to be better.
Love that from Bossy, and I think I know where he's coming from, because you wonder why they're always in close games, Carlton, and they don't ever really blow teams away, apart from probably the way they beat North Melbourne on Good Friday. But look at the quarters won this year. They've won 14 quarters, they've lost 13, and they've drawn 1. So they're just too hot and cold within games. They give you a chance. They rely on the midfield to beat you up, and then they can lapse in defence. And there was just some pieces of play, Nat, which I saw from Geelong, where they're defensively not quite right. And I think if they're not on against Collingwood on Friday night, they'll be hurt. So take a look at some of this ball movement from Geelong, and that'd be the concern for Michael Voss in that. Yeah, they probably just lapsed too many times defensively. I don't like their defence compared to other team defences, so their midfield has to be on to protect this defence, which wasn't. Their midfield was good again, but the ball movement would be something we would consider.
And I know Curnow is still leading the Coleman medal after the 7 completed matches of each team, but is he doing enough for them? Are they getting enough out of the double prong of Mackay? And in recent weeks, the past fortnight, De Koning also going forward?
Well, they're playing well, but if they don't mark the footy, I think it comes out a bit too quick. That's a risk when you play such big forwards.
To the MCG now on Sunday afternoon. The Swans dismantling the Hawks to the tune of 76 points. Damo, do you firmly believe that the Swans are serious premiership contenders?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, people want to question what they beat, and I don't know what they beat yesterday, Nat. We'll touch on Hawthorn in a moment, but their game stands up. They've lost 1 game, and it was to a team they shouldn't have lost to. It was Richmond. It came in a week where they had some issues off-field with individuals and players and relationships. It was minor, but it affected them in the lead up to that game. They lost it. It's the only game they've lost. Their game stacks up. They're kicking goals. They're setting games up early, and they're doing it with a bit of Geelong-like flair, with Isaac Heaney just elevating himself in his 10th season in the game to, if he's not the best player in the game, he's second to Jeremy Cameron.
There's a lot of players around the comp that are just accumulating, but they're junk possessions. Whereas what I love about the Swans is Goulden, every disposal hurts you. Isaac Heaney, he didn't have huge numbers yesterday. Look at that, 21 disposals, but he just hurts you with every single disposal. Chad Warner, your man Damo, he just punishes you with every disposal. So they just cut Hawthorn to ribbons. So the stats across the board looked okay for Hawthorn, except the scoreboard, and that's how punishing they are with their disposal.
On Isaac Heaney, favourite for the Brownlow, do you think?
Oh yeah, he'd be in front, 100%. Mate.
Let's talk about the Hawks, because it was their heaviest loss for the season. Some talk about, obviously, that game against the Gold Coast maybe not being their worst. This was Coach Sam Mitchell after the game when asked about the effort.
I mean, the margin is worse than the Gold Coast game, but I think I looked at today's game. If you watched it without a scoreboard, you would have said the Brown and Gold boys are having a crack. They're really putting a lot of pressure on the opposition, and sometimes a handball, like our handball inefficiency was really poor today. We fueled their pressure, but I thought we were able to put them under some pressure and get some turnovers that they wouldn't have been too happy with, but we didn't hurt them.
Damo, it wasn't a pretty performance. Did you think they were having a crack?
Well, to use the without a scoreboard analogy, Nat, that's what happens in skill sport when you don't have a scoreboard. And if that's the form of positives you want to take out of an AFL game, I don't know where they're at, Nat. And the one win they've had is against a team that cannot win a game of footy in North Melbourne. And this rebuild, and it was a clear rebuild from Sam Mitchell 3 years ago, it hasn't tracked the right way in my eyes. And I don't see it yet reaching the
Is it a
turning point.
recruiting issue? Or?
Yeah, it's a player quality issue. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can cull as much as you want, but if you don't get good players in, you're in trouble. North Melbourne has proven that. West Coast had proven that for a little bit. They're getting themselves right again. And Hawthorn's in there now.
And they've had a number of top draft picks as well. Denver Granger Barras, you look at Josh Ward, Cam McKenzie. I mean, still some of them quite young. I'm not sure that Denver Granger Barras is potentially going to make it, not in the side at the moment. But Lloydie, I want to talk to you about, I mean, the Hawks, they were poor on a number of fronts, but certainly their delivery into attack by foot was poor, and it allowed the Swans just to pick them off.
No doubt, Nat. Sydney just took intercept marks at will. The likes of Malikan and McCartan and Blakey, those types of players just marked it non-stop. And the problem Hawthorn have is they lack class. So James Worpel, he's a solid player, but he lacks class. I think Newcombe lacks class. He had to give that handball. He doesn't give it. You've got to try and break this up. Chol, you've got to compete harder than that. Newcombe, drop it low. Sydney lay off their players better than any other team in the competition. And again, Jack Gunson, you've still got to bring it to ground, but Hawthorn, lower the eyes to Jarman Impey and drop it short. They just had poor vision, brought these sort of players into the game like Malik, and it just happened time and time again. Connor McDonald, he's probably let down by forwards who don't know, but Sydney read the play better than half the forwards. Here's another one. Look at the hands out in the air, say, give me the handball. They didn't want to give it. Could have been dropped to Connor McDonald, but then Blakey reads the play. And they became so predictable, Hawthorn, at not giving it, that watch the way Sydney players read the ball. They're actually playing like the forwards, yet they were the defenders yesterday. So I think Hawthorn have a real lack of class through the midfield, and it's a massive concern for Sam Mitchell. Yeah,
that was damning vision. All right, let's move on to the Gold Coast Suns now. A solid win against the Eagles for them, and we've spoken at length about their academy players in Ethan Reid, Jed Walter and Will Graham, all debuting this season, and they unveiled another one, Damo, in Jake Rogers at the weekend. Lively in his first game.
You get more excited than I know of anyone else when it comes to young players coming through, and his highlights package is pretty good for game number 2, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. We'll get to that in just a moment, but let's hear what his coach Damien Hardwick had to say about him after the game.
You know, we sort of knew the player we have. He's very clean with the ball in hand, and he makes, I think the measure of a really good player is that you make others around you better, and that's what he did today. You know, his ability to find a target inside 50 is probably something we've lacked a little bit, and he started to bring that. You know, he's only going to get better as he gets fitter.
22 touches, 13 of those contested, kicked a goal, had 8 score involvements, and they just keep finding them, Lloydie.
They do, and I think it's going to change the rules for the rest of the competition. I think the whinging that's going on from President. So there's Jake Rogers. We saw Caleb Graham kick that goal with the first clip. Jed Walter, speaking to Mark McVeigh, who coached the Allies last year, he said, this is Josh Kennedy from the West Coast Eagles. That's the type of player he's going to be. He's just big, he's strong, he's powerful.
Do you see that?
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I think he's as strong a key forward as a first year that I've seen, and he has a nastiness to him where he wants to run down, chase.
Well, you like that bit.
I like that too. So that's where the rules will change, because they got 3 guns off the top, in the top 20 draft picks.
Moving on to the Giants now, so another expansion club who, next to Geelong, are really the serious contenders when it comes to a premiership. For mine, they were excellent against the Lions on Thursday night, but it wasn't their stars, Damo, that impressed. It was their lesser lights, and I talk about the likes of Pete Ling, Harvey Thomas, Darcy Jones on debut, Riccardi Bedford, the list goes on.
And this man on screen.
I know, and he's one of the high draft picks.
Finn Callahan.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Look, he had a bit of an interrupted off-season, and he has taken a little bit of time to ease in. I'm only raising that because he's now hit it, and what we are seeing is the next great on-baller, and he's just handballed there to another already established great on-baller in Tom Green. So, look, the absences of Green, Taylor and Canilio, it's actually helped this club. I know they lost last week because of those absences, or partially because of those absences, but it's allowed the maturity of the Callahan and those others to, I think, flourish inside the season itself and inside a game.
They say that you're only as good as your bottom 6. 6, their depth is incredible, isn't it?
It is incredible, but they also work extremely hard. And well done, Adam Kingsley. What a job he's done at the GWS Giants to rejuvenate this team and also get them playing the way they are. But yeah, they made Brisbane look second-rate as a midfield group. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the Brisbane Lions. They're 2-5, and you know, obviously made the grand final last season, losing to Collingwood by a kick. Can they get their season back on track? We take a look there at their next 4. I don't know, like the Q Clash, the Suns could win again.
They could. I mean, you'd like to think they're a chance in 3, if not all 4 of those games. And what that would mean, that I don't know. They're not going to win with how they've played to this point. So I think they need to change something quite drastically. Chris Fagan last year made a massive call by his standards when he dropped and took out of the team Daniel Rich and Jack Gunston out of one game. And it hurt him to do it, but it changed and transformed the attitude of that club. I think he's at that stage now. And I don't claim to know who it is that needs to move, and it might just be an attitudinal change as opposed to a physical personnel change. But something has to be snapped here because it's got away from them already.
I don't want to put it on you either, Lloyd, to say name someone who should be dropped. But when you look at the side, what do you see that needs to change?
Well, Damon and I were talking about their depth, just how poor it is at the bottom end. So they're being exposed a little bit. Their bottom 6 is a long way off other teams. But I just look at like a guy like Cameron Rayner, for example, can be so good against Melbourne.
Yeah.
I thought he was really good in the first half, but he has 3 disposals. So I'd love to ask Cam or the Lions a question. Does he work as hard as an Isaac Heaney or a Sam Walsh? Does he? So they're the questions I ask of him. Eric Hipwood. I'd love to see him spend a week with Jeremy Cameron and say, do you run and measure their Ks? I know they play different roles, but how many contests does Hipwood and Danaher get to? Do we ever see Tom Hawkins just drop and not chase like we see Joey Danaher not chase? So they're the things that have you not win big games and have you knock on the door, not quite get there, and that's where the Lions are at currently. And they're to name a few, but there's a lot of players right off. Lachie Neale doesn't handle the tag very well. I don't see other champion players drop their bundle like Lachie Neale drops his bundle when he gets sat on, and he's the leader. Harris Andrews trails in far too often for a captain. So anyway, I hope perhaps some of them listen and see that that's not what's having them fall short a lot of the time.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be some pretty tough conversations at the Brisbane Lions throughout the next few weeks. On the Dockers, though, it was an amazing response after losing in the Western Derby, of course, against the Dogs on Saturday night. They're now 4-3, back in the top 8, and it was their midfield that was far too strong for a Bulldogs side that, let's be honest, Damo, they were missing Todd Liberatore.
They were, but it wasn't an excuse, Nat, for what happened. The way this midfield was dominated by the Dockers. What we did see in this game was Nat Fyfe's best game for some time in this Justin Longmuir system, and the ability to play the way that Longmuir wanted him to and not necessarily be the man that he had been previously for much of his career, and to win 2 Brownlows. He played that team system that Cameron's playing within the Geelong team and Heaney's playing within the Sydney team. He's tailored that now, hasn't he?
Yeah, and it was only a few weeks ago that the Bombers midfield smashed the Dogs as well. So they've got massive, massive concerns through that midfield. The names look okay, but they're not performing.
Time now for our crypto bold play, and this week it's Adelaide star Josh Rochelle. He dazzled us with this bold play. You can see here, and I think Luke Pedlar in the end is the man that gets on the end of a goal, but pretty clever there, just through the legs. I believe that's called a nutmeg, is that right?
I've heard that, Nat. I think it's a soccer term. I don't follow soccer, so I'll
I thought a nutmeg was something else, but that's for a different day and not access.
Yeah, we won't go down that path. But what I'm glad there is he didn't lose the flair that he's always had, despite the week he had previously, where he took a couple of short steps and addressed it publicly and said he's got to get better. I liked how he kept that side of his game still in play for the very next match.
All right, time for quick hands. Lloyd, you're up first. Are Adelaide a better team than their 2-5 record suggests?
I'd say yes, but they'd want to show it and beat Port Adelaide, who are injured this Friday night. One for you, Damo. Is there still a gap between Port Adelaide and the top 4 sides?
Yep, big gap. I need to see a whole lot more, and I'm going to need to see it for a 6 to 8 week period, not just a one-match go for the Power. Hey, Nat, are you confident St Kilda will beat North Melbourne this Saturday?
Yes, I don't need to elaborate any further than that. Where will North Melbourne, though, get their next win? This is to both of you. Look at their next 10.
This is their next 10. Well, there's no side they should be beating. Where's the West Coast one played in round 13? That's what we need to know. If it's in Melbourne, you might look at that one.
They've got Hawthorn in round 24 down in Tassie, so that could be the wooden spoon.
They'll win one day, mate.
Well, will they? I'm not convinced they will. Lordo, does Jamie Elliott, and given you were once a Mark of the Year winner, have Mark of the Year for 2024 in the bag?
Oh, well, it's hard. It's going to have to take something pretty special to beat this. To sit on a guy who's 202 centimetres in Benny Mackay's shoulders and just launch up there. It's actually quite scary up there, and he just held it right.
Oh, you know
to
that,
the
do you?
end.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, how does your Mark of the Year compare to this one?
That's better than yours.
That's questionable. One for you, Nat. Will Buddy Franklin be remembered as a hawk or a swan?
To quote the old El Paso girl, why can't we have both? I mean, I feel like he played his most exciting and dynamic footy at the Hawks. He was certainly brilliant at the Sydney Swans, obviously kicking the 1,000 goal and notching that up. But
we don't sit on the fence on accessorial areas, Nat. Hawks or Swans?
The Hawks. Come on, that's when it is. That is best. All right, Crypto.com tipping leaderboard now. And Lloyd and I took some risks last week. We thought we'd change things up, and we've fallen even further behind.
You know, he hasn't lost a week. You haven't lost a week. We haven't.
It'll happen, Lloyd. I've been doing this for 40 years. It will happen. I'm no good at it. See?
All right. That is all we have time for on Access All Areas. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you again, same time, same place, next week. In the meantime, have a fantastic Monday.